Tonight, how I booked my first 60 podcast appearances. Yes, we'll be going step by step into those details. At the time of this live, I've actually been featured on over 90 podcast shows. However, the last 30 or so really came from the first 60. So it does get easier. For now, though, on this episode, we'll get into the difficult step by step of the first 60 and how I was able to book those and appear on those. And now when you Google me, a whole bunch of stuff pops up. Now, before we go into all of that, I know some of you are likely new to our show here this evening. You are watching Entrepreneurship is a Marathon by yours truly, Vanessa Zammy, the business defibrillator. My clients call me the business defibrillator because I help bring life back to them and their business. Specifically, I consult local community businesses and micro businesses in helping them to revive, grow, and scale their business without the burnout, sleep deprivation, or overwhelm. And as always, in every episode, what has been your win of the week? We take a moment, we take some time to understand what has been your win of the week. So I want you to share it in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, then essentially it'll be, let's go to the bottom of the page, hit the subscribe button, and then scroll a little further and type in your comments, what has been your win of the week? Now, it is only Tuesday evening at the time of this live. You might be watching this the following day, Wednesday morning. We have a lot of people who watch the replays. I want you to put hashtag replay if you're one of such people, right? Hashtag replay, put that in the comments. And so ultimately, though, it is Tuesday. And so you might be like, but Vanessa, the week is Tuesday. It was a holiday yesterday. Like, what do you mean? So last 7 days, how about that? Last 7 days, what has been your win of the week, right? This could be a personal win. It could be a business win. It could be a combination of both. But what has been your win of the week? Take the moment to celebrate here. If you're watching on LinkedIn, if you're watching us live on LinkedIn, then the comments will be to your right side. So you can, essentially go to the bottom. You look your eyes to the bottom. You see the reactions. You do a little reaction. And then you move your eyes to the right. You'll see the comment section there. If you're watching on Facebook as well, you can scroll, react, and then write in your comments what has been your win of the week. Yeah, I did not prepare this question beforehand. So what has been my win of the week? Essentially, what's my win of the week? So let's see. Oh, my win of the week was finding out that in my business last quarter, we're working on a new project. And so we were looking at, okay, what is the funding space look like for business? So we applied for some grants and we actually ended up winning a grant. So that's been my win of the week, is finding out that we actually won this grant. This is great. And another win of the week actually also has been, the announcement has not been made public on the grant yet, so we can't tell you names, et cetera. It has not been made public yet. But ultimately, another win as well is receiving another paid speaking engagement for the end of the year. So we're really excited about that, and showing these professionals how to avoid burnout. So we're really excited about that as well. So lots of wins actually this week. But what has been your win of the week? Type in the comments. So we're here this evening to talk about how I booked step by step my first 60 podcast appearances. Now, the context of this is that essentially this was within the first 2 years of my business. And how it all started was originally, and actually not, this was my second year business. Originally, I was like, okay, during this next year, I'm going to get 80 speaking engagements on stage in person in a year. And then, as we were going through things, the pandemic happened. And so it was like, okay, events are canceled. So maybe that's not, okay, great. Alrighty, let's reframe that goal. Now, after some time, I then learned about podcasts when I just entered more into the online space, and it was on that podcast fever, so to speak. And so I set a goal in Q4 of 2020 to get booked on podcasts. There was no number this time. I was just like, let's get me booked on a podcast, like just etc. So how did I end up getting booked on over 60 podcasts? Okay, so first, right? Was really for me, the site that I used was Matchmaker.fm. So I'm also telling people about the site. So I use Matchmaker. And now I'll include a list of the resources as well. If you're watching on the YouTube, there'll be a list of the resources. If you scroll down to the description and hit the read more, then you'll see some resources as well in the description of this video here, this episode here. So if you're watching on the podcast, then there should be, depending on the platform, there should be some resources as well, too, in the show notes. But ultimately, it's Matchmaker.fm. There's some other sites as well that I'll include in that resources. But Matchmaker.fm was a site that was really beneficial for me. And so when it came down to it, from Matchmaker.fm, there are other sites like Podmatch, Podchaser. There are some Facebook groups as well, too. And so Matchmaker.fm ultimately was my space for first, searching for podcasts, right? And so when you're using these sites, and searching for a podcast. One, search carefully, right? What does that mean? Ensuring that your audience is a fit, ensuring that who you're actually looking to speak to matches with the audience, right? So if you're a woman empowerment, like you're just like, I'm all about women empowerment and coaching. I mean, there could be an argument to be made for, reaching out to a podcast that, really targets men, like some allyship situation could be happening there, right? And so that could be an argument you could make. And or you can also just ensure that you're targeting people who are, either all, entire audience, etc. Right? But ultimately ensuring that your audience is a fit, right? If you're looking to speak to businesses, but the audience of the podcast is essentially professionals, not businesses, not a fit, right? So that's number one. So search carefully. Number two, depending on your stage of business, you may have to align with, the list of the actual podcast. So I'll put an example, right? So let's say you just started your business a year ago, or let's say you started your business yesterday, right? You're not going to go out to Oprah, especially if this is your first business, right? Now this is your 10th business and you already have some accolades and some following and blah, 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 right? You're not going to go try to be on, Russell Brunson's podcast, right? Let's say you are, let's say you were just on the Forbes list or whatever, right? So that may merit itself. Maybe you're on the New York Times bestseller, etc. You could probably put that out there as well. But ultimately, think of it as like an A list versus B list versus C list ranking of podcasts, right? And so, depending on your stage of business, you might have to reach out to C list, or you might be able to actually reach out to the A list or somewhere in between. So keeping that in mind. And then a third thing to keep in mind as well when you're searching for the podcast, this is all before the actual outreach. We're going to the outreach part. Before the actual outreach is 3, when it comes to including all these resources at the bottom of the description. So it'll be Matchmaker, Podchaser, Facebook groups, etc. Choose only one platform to start with, right? So I mentioned for me, I went with Matchmaker.fm. Actually didn't know about any of the other ones. Matchmaker.fm was the one that I knew about. That's the one I had signed up for. I said, okay, great. Right, I paid for a subscription. I said, all right, I'm going to make the subscription work for me because I'm going to get booked on these podcasts. So we're going to talk about the mechanics of that. So choose only one platform to start with. Do it for a month. See how you feel, and you can stay or go. And then I'll include some additional resources, but pretty much that's what it is, right? So that's the initial search process. Search carefully. Ensure your audience is a fit. Depending on your stage of business, be mindful of, what is that caliber of podcast, etc. But also don't sell your show short. Feel free to reach out and see what happens. And then 3 is choosing only one platform to start with. Okay. Next, the actual outreach part, right? So this is just the research part, the actual outreach part. So in my case, I actually messaged over 200 podcasters and actually ended up getting a 30% response rate. And so the way that I had that happen was I set a time. This was fall, winter of 2020. I set a time each day. And also at the time, I also had a corporate job at that time too. So I really had limited time to work with it. So I set a time each day. It was like 1 hour time frame. And in that hour, so in the beginning, obviously you don't have any messages to reply to. You first got to set the message. So in the hour, it was like, just send messages out. Okay. And then at some point I started getting replies. At some point I started getting not replies. And so I had to follow up with people. And then for the ones that did reply, I had to reply to them. So in that hour, it was very much like I was either messaging someone new, replying to someone who had messaged me back, or following up with people who hadn't responded. That's pretty much what I was doing. Right. I didn't say, oh, I have an hour. Oh, wait, the people messaged me. Let me stand it to 3 hours. Nope. 1 hour each day was the maximum I gave myself. And I was consistent with that. I was doing it literally consistently and religiously. And, now were there times where I was like, oh my God, messaging is so annoying? Absolutely. I do not like randomly messaging people and strangers. So it wasn't a fun habit of mine, but I had a goal in mind and I had already subscribed to this thing as well. And so I said, you know what, make the goal happen. We're going to do this outreach, right? So being consistent and religious. So for me, it was an hour each day. Whereas in the beginning, it was definitely sending a whole bunch of outbound messages and messaging people like, hey, I want to be in your podcast. Here's a topic. Here's about me, etc. And then for the, other side, as the weeks progressed and it became follow-ups, it became scheduling, all that stuff, right? And so I had a team at the place, but I didn't have them actually doing that part of the business for me because I hadn't had a process yet, really. I was just still trying to figure out the beginning stages of how to get booked on podcasts, right? So then that was the second thing. Now you might be asking, Vanessa, what do I say in this message, right? What do I say in this message? I'm messaging people. I'm doing the things, but no one's responding. Why not? I don't get it. So with that being said, the actual message itself. So the actual message itself has about 4 components to it. So the first one is having sort of a relevant, enticing title and topic that accurately describes what you do. Right. So some sort of, like for me, it was mental health, efficiency, and how, to cut out the busy work, how solopreneurs can cut out the busy work. At the time, that was like the big message that I was going for. And then so that was the title, right? So title and the subject. Then the second thing is you need to have an understanding of their show. So including something, because people get messages all day long, right? So including something where it's, think about it like when you get a random email from someone, or you get some Instagram DM, or you get some LinkedIn message from someone who clearly didn't even read your profile, right? You don't want to be that person. So to help you with not be that person, understand the podcast whole show, include and mention that you put 1 to 2 sentences in the beginning of your message. It might be email, it might be DM, whatever it may be. 1 to 2 sentences in the beginning of your message, showing you actually know what you're reaching out for. Okay. And then 3, right, go into, so that's like the first sort of paragraph, it's a mini paragraph. And then 3, going into your suggested topic and why it's important, right? So what is the topic you actually want to go on their podcast for? It's not, oh, I just want to be on your podcast. Can I be on your podcast? Like what? Right? They probably get multiple of those messages. You want to say, I want to be on your podcast to talk about this topic. This topic is important and relevant to your audience. I know this because X, Y, Z, ABC, blah, 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 right? So including some data, some stats, if that's relevant. Including, like for me, we actually included some of our messages, many of our messages included sort of a link to an article that was written that sort of related to the topic to some sense. And so it's like kind of like, oh, look, it's a relevant topic. Kind of let them know it's a relevant topic in case you didn't know, right? So essentially it's just a topic and why it's important. And notice the specificity, right? So this whole entire message is all about being specific, right? You're not spamming people. You're sending targeted specific messages to specific hosts, whether it be through a platform or email or whatever it may be, letting them know that you care, you understand, and that you're trying to help them, right? And then 4 is including some bio credibility. Don't assume they're going to read your email and then decide to Google you, right? Don't assume they're going to, click on the link at the signature, right? It's essentially the title, topic, right? Understand their show, assessing your topic, and then the last paragraph is some like a few 2 to 3 sentences on your credibility, right? Why are you the right person to talk about this topic? Because you can essentially send this email and say, this is a topic you should have on your show. Well, they can get that topic to someone else. So why you, right? Why should you be the one that they should invite to their show to, share about this topic? What makes you an expert pretty much in this topic that you suggested they bring you on the show to talk about? Sounds simple, and yet many people don't do it. So let's go through it again. So essentially in the outreach stage, right? In the outreach stage, you are searching carefully, using feel free to use one of the resources I mentioned in the description. And you're making sure you're searching carefully, depending on your stage of business, you're ensuring that, the audience fits and also the caliber also fits too. If you're nervous about it, I would say, try to go for the early stage podcast and then, work your way up to getting to the higher level. Choose only one platform to actually do your outreach and research on. Do it for a month, see how you feel, and then either stay or go. When it comes to the actual outreaching, right, I messaged over in this time frame. I mean, I could have messaged more, but based on when we started getting scheduling, all such things happened and people started responding, I ended up messaging over only 200 podcasters and got a really high response rate. And that was through consistently setting a time each day where I actually committed to, it was an hour each day where I committed to actually messaging them, following up, replying, scheduling, whatever it may be. And mind you, like I did this myself, right? I didn't have an assistant doing this for me, right? At least not yet at that time. Eventually, I then made it to a process and system, and then, right, had an assistant take care of it. But ultimately, it's when you're doing this for yourself, you need to ensure what is it that you want to talk about, right? And feel free, if you have an assistant doing this for you, share this episode with them. Give them some tips. I was on a call with a colleague a few weeks ago, and it's part of what inspired this podcast episode. I was on a phone with a colleague a few weeks ago on Zoom, and he was sharing that, he had an assistant doing the podcast outreach for them. And I said, okay, is she doing this? X, Y, Z, ABC, 1, 2, 3, right? And then he gave her those tips, and they actually get some replies, right? So, and then we think about what's actually saying the message, as I shared, have an enticing title or topic, understand the person's show, and make them know that you understand their show and that you've actually seen what they do, etc. Suggest a topic and why it's important. and then provide some bio credibility about yourself and why you're the right person to talk about this topic and why they should put you on the show. Right now, some cautionary tales when it comes to this thing. Okay, cautionary tales. So I'm reading my notes here because there were lots of cautionary tales, 5 of them. So this is not a get rich quick thing. This is not a get clients quick. This is not a get leads quick strategy. Okay. Because a lot of people, you know, they were just like, oh, Vanessa, I see you're on so many podcasts. Like, how did you do that? And like, I'm trying to get clients and people tell me podcast is the way to go. Right. But these are also the same people who are trying to like get clients tomorrow. Right. This is not a get clients tomorrow situation. Why not? Because you don't have control on the episode timing. The podcast host controls when your episode comes out. Okay. It might come out the next week. It might come out 6 months from now. They have control over that. Okay. So with that being said, a tip for you is that when you have your call to action, when you're, you know, when they're saying, how do you follow up with you? Keep it general with some specificity, right? And at least ensure that what you're sharing with them has some longevity, right? So whether it be a consult call, discovery call, a lead magnet, just follow me on social media, whatever it may be, but ensuring there's some longevity with it, so to speak, right? So you have no control of the episode timing. And then 2, ensure you also do have a call to action or some sort of link. It could either be as simple as follow me on LinkedIn or follow me on Facebook or here's my YouTube channel, subscribe to the channel, right? For me, I was using my consult call at the time, Underwhelm Your Overwhelmed Business Session, which I still have to this day. So it's still relevant. I know, it's great. And it's part of the reason why I don't change a link because I know that it's out there in the web. And now I also will sometimes vary in terms of if I get invited to speak. Like today, I was just invited to speak on a podcast, right? So now it's at the, after those first 50 to 60 appearances, now I had people essentially reaching out to me to be a guest on their podcast. So pretty much the outreach kind of stopped. It does get easier, folks. It does get easier to get booked on podcasts. But first, you got to do the initial grunt work to make that happen. And so now what I do, I depending on the podcast audience, depending on when they tell me the episode might be released, etc., I'll either use my discovery call, my complimentary Underwhelming Overwhelmed Business Session, or I'll use my masterclass that I have, How to Grow Your Purpose-Driven Business Without Burnout. So I have that option as well too. And those two are like right now on the screen is power.vzammy.com. That's a simple complimentary link. The masterclass, yourbusinessrevival.com. Knows how simple these links are, right? It's not bit.ly/453MJZ, right? Like it's something where people can remember it and type it themselves or click on it very simply. Okay. And the thing is that now the great thing about podcasts, which is probably why you've heard about why it's great, is because these things live online, right? Or they're in the web for a long time. So there are people probably listening to an episode I was interviewed on like 2 years ago, as you're listening to this episode on my podcast right now, right? And so now Vanessa Zammy on a podcast 2 years ago is different from Vanessa Zammy today, right? So whether or not it's a good thing they're listening to 2020 and 2021, everything happens for a reason, I say. So you be my guest. So with that being said, we don't start out perfect, okay, when it comes to these things. So with that being said, though, but if you take these steps that I share with you on the podcast, right, it will help you to optimize your success in getting actual follow-up and getting outreach and getting bookings. And then once you get the bookings, actually making the most of the bookings as well too, right? So that you can ensure that you have this longevity for your business on the web, right? Remember, this is not a get rich quick, get clients quick, get these quick, right? Remove that misnomer from your head, right? You're not going to get on a podcast tomorrow and all of a sudden a client comes the next day after that. Like, no, right? So generally speaking, it is, depending on if you might get an A-list audience person though, who does like daily episodes and you're like live for that day. And, that's all of a sudden they have a really active audience and you just really are really great. It's your first appearance and you're like rocking it. That is a case where you'll get a client the next day. Okay. Otherwise, do not think that this is going to be I'm going to be on this podcast and now I'm going to make lots of money in my business. Like that's generally, don't assume that. That's a terrible assumption. With that being said though, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, like is podcasting even right for you? It depends on your business. It depends on your style of communication, right? It depends on, in terms of, I share with you already tips on how to structure your email to the podcasters. The specific topic is going to be dependent on your business, right? So if you say, Vanessa, what topic should I choose? I don't know. What business do you have? What are your product services? What and some of you may even have like 10 different topics you can choose from to email people out, right? You might have 15 million talking points right? But the podcast episode is 20 minutes, or the podcast episode is an hour. And so you're like, can I even talk for that long? Can I talk for that short, etc. Right? And so if you're looking for more additional help and support in that area, you're welcome to book a session with me using the link in the description. Complimentary Underwhelm Your Overwhelm business session. I've also put it linked in the bottom of the screen too, right? So in general, if you are a local community business looking to revive, grow, and scale your business, then by all means, feel free to schedule time with me to let's connect further on your business. If you're looking for getting into the podcast game, you haven't already gone into it, then check out the resources below. Rewatch and re-listen to this episode here. And if you're in the stage where you're still like, you've done the steps and you think for some reason it's not working for you, that calls for a deeper dive. That calls for, when you look at your messaging, we look at your topic, we look at who you're actually outreaching to, we look at like what is, pretty much all that is what's going to factor into play. So those specifics can only happen really during a session. So right now, start out with understanding, does it even make sense for that session? Complimentary Underwhelm Your Overwhelm business session. Link is at the bottom of the description or in the comments if you're watching on LinkedIn or Facebook, power.vzammy.com. And with that being said, have a lovely, lovely, abundant rest of the evening. Chat soon.